Well folks, it's Greg here for GSvervine. Well, it's springtime and the blossoms are out, as you can see. And we're going to have to start talking about travel. Now, a lot of people have asked, you know, it's all well and good to talk about all this travel, but how do I afford it? Well, I have good news for you. Stick around. Okay, so you've made that move, you've decided mentally you're ready to go. You want to make a change. You want to get out of your boring lifestyle. You just want to get out there and see what's out there. Okay, so let's talk about how you're going to do this. Now, the first thing I would say is that if you work for a company that's an international company, you know, multinational corporation, the first thing you'd want to do is find out if there's an office in the country that you're interested in. Or maybe wherever there is an office, maybe you'd be interested to go and live there. That would be the first step. The second thing is your company planning to open an office in a foreign country? Now that would be an easy access. The second thing from a business standpoint would be, are you willing to invest some money in a foreign country? Many countries offer long-term visas for foreigners who want to invest in the country and employ one or two local people. That would be a very good option if you wanted to have an investment abroad and also experience living abroad. You would be accomplishing two things in one. The third option I would say would be what is commonly used, and mainly by young people. Now, I've done a few of these options. And I would say that the most common one is to teach your language in a foreign country. Now, I'll be talking about English because English is my first language, and many of the people that I've known, expats living abroad, have been teaching English. But this applies to any language. It doesn't matter. Most countries, and I would say almost all countries, have some community of expats, and their children or they themselves require education in their language. Also, there are many countries where people want to learn a foreign language. Now, English is the international language, so it's probably the most flexible option that you would have. So if that's your first language, well, you'd be one step ahead. Now, to teach English abroad, you would need a few things. You'd need to be, first of all, a native English speaker. That's required. You would need to have a university degree. Most countries, and countries that you'd probably want to go to anyway, would require a university degree, probably of any type, as long as you're an English speaker. And secondly, you would need to be qualified as an ESL, English as a Second Language teacher. Now, many of these courses are offered online. There's no limit to you getting a certificate, and you can do it from the comfort of your own home, online courses, that I mean. So that's a very easy step into getting qualified. Another option would be if you are maybe married to a spouse who comes from a foreign country, or are your parents from a foreign country, at least one. That would be an easy access also to be able to go back, visit family and live abroad. And that would be probably a very comfortable way to get there. So these are some of the options that you have. Explore them and see what works for you. Now, let's assume that you've gone through that phase and now you're ready to get going. Things are in place, you have a job offer to teach, or you have a job offer from your company or a foreign company. Now, I forgot to mention that many companies advertise internationally. You can go to the consulates in your country and check and see what jobs are offered there. Or you can work with a headhunter that's looking for people in your expertise. Sometimes you'd be surprised what foreign countries need. Don't assume that you have to be an engineer or you know, a nuclear physicist to be in demand. You'd be surprised. Some of the most low-skilled jobs are required depending on the country that you're focusing on. So explore everything. Don't leave anything out. Okay, so like I said, if you had gone through these stages and now you're ready to go, you're all set, you got your job offer, you have to do a medical because that's going to be required, and you have all your papers in place. Now you have to start thinking about how to prepare for traveling abroad. And that's step number 2. Okay, so step number 2, and now we're thinking about getting organized. The first thing I would remind you of, look, I have to tell you because this is very funny. If you have a pet, that's probably the first thing that you should try to get organized. Make sure you get all the proper official requirements for moving to the country that you are going to go to. Make sure the vet is fully knowledgeable on what has to be done, and make sure the papers are well in place. You can't do anything if you have a pet and you don't have the right papers and certificates organized. And I've gone through this before, and I'm telling you, make sure you have that well in place. You would not want to arrive at an airport without the proper papers. Now your ticket is booked and you're ready to go, but you can't take the cat. What would you do? So I have to stress that that's a very important step. And I have many stories about that. I have a very international cat. Actually, it's not my cat, it's my daughter's. And that cat should be speaking a few languages. So make sure you get the pet thing out of the way, right certification, right vaccinations, and now you're all set. I made a few notes because there are a few things that you have to think about. If you own a house or an apartment, condominium, things like that, and you are not going to sell it because you're not going to move abroad forever, you're just going to go for a few years. And remember, this can span out. You may think, well, I just want to go for a year or 2, and then fall in love with that place and you want to stay for about 5 years. So be prepared. If you're going to rent your place out, make sure you have a proper rental agreement. Make sure everything is spelled out. The responsibility of the renter, your responsibility, and what can change in the course of that contract. Some things you should be a little flexible on. So, you know, like for example, if you have a house with a yard that the tenant wants to do a little bit of gardening. Now you may not have considered it, but if you think about it, in 5 years or 3 years, you're coming back, you can probably just redo what you had there before and make that tenant comfortable. Because what you want is a good and satisfied, contented tenant who feels comfortable in the house that you've rented out. Make sure you have a rental agreement that spells out everything. And I mean little things like, what responsibilities do I have in terms of repairing things? You don't want to be called on, you know, and usually because of time differences, you'd be called on at times when you're in bed. For little things like, I lost the key, can I change the lock? Little things. So a good idea is to have a minimum repair responsibility allowance in the contract. For example, anything under $50, you take care of it. It's too small for me to have to bother about it. And make sure it's agreed upon by both parties. So as long as you have the rental thing out of the way, properly contracted and spelled out, you'd be okay. The next thing is moving your things. Now, this is important also. Actually, all these points are important because I've weeded out all the little things that you would know. They're quite obvious. Don't take any furniture. Do not take any furniture. I mean, you would find furniture where you're going. You're going to rent someplace and it would come furnished. Or you would get the most basic furniture like a bed and table to eat on and chair to sit in. And you can buy little things like plates and knives and forks cheaply. I'm sure you're not leaving your country to go to live in the most expensive place in the world. And even if you are, then you'd be paid higher wages. So things tend to even out. Don't take any furniture. Just pack the basic clothes that you need, and that would be sufficient. Another thing is books. If you can get all your books digitized or take ebooks. If you have a Kindle, for example, I'm not advertising Amazon Kindle, but that's what I have. You can put all your books into one little 7-inch device, and it can hold probably the whole of your local library. So don't take any paper books. It's just too heavy, and storage space is at a premium wherever you're going. Make sure that you have your banking all organized. Make sure your access to the ATM is at its maximum. What I mean by that is make sure you can withdraw as much as the bank will allow you within the limits of your balance. This is very important. You may not need it, but just in case. And remember, when you're moving abroad, you don't have the comforts of just walking over to your home or family member, things like that. You're dependent on yourself. After all, this is the whole idea of going abroad. You want to experience something different, an independence, a freedom. And to do these things, you should try to put everything in place that will make it easier, not harder. Make sure your cards are set up for international access. Sometimes, if you have not thought about it, your cards only work in the area, in your country, maybe even in your city. So make sure your cards are internationalized, and make sure your ATM withdrawals are at their maximum. And your passport. Make sure you have a passport that's as recent as possible. So you can plan all of these things to have your passport, if you have a 5-year issue, to be as close to full 5-year as possible. That, along with your bank cards, are very important things to think about. And one final point that I have to say is, when you're thinking about containing all your assets in the house or apartment, if you've rented it out, or if a family member is going to stay there, make sure if you're going to put things in storage for renting out your place, that you minimize what you take there. Remember, things like electronics will be way out of date by the time you come back. Things that have liquids will have evaporated. Oils would have coagulated, or whatever that term is. They would become gooey and destroy the mechanisms that they're meant to protect. Look at these things, get rid of them, sell them. You would probably want to update those things in 2 or 3 years anyway. Minimize what you store, keep only the very basics. Remember things like bed, linens, beds themselves, mattresses I mean, pillowcases, and clothing. They don't store well. Even for 6 months, by the time you come back, if the moths haven't gotten them, mold and mildew would. So minimize the storage space. It'll cost you less in the long run. The cost that you would spend on storing all these things, hoping to come back and use them, it's not worth it. I've been there. Trust me on that one. So once you have all of these things in place, you're well organized, you've minimized the things that you're going to keep in storage, you've properly prepared your contract for your rental home or apartment, and you have your pet all organized, you're all set to make the 3rd step. Okay, so step 3 in this 3-stage process. So now you've gone through all the basic and important things that you need to do. And there are 2 things that I should remind you that you should take into consideration very strongly. One is to sell your car if you do have one. It really does not pay to hold on to it. It's just another burden and something to think and worry about with insurance and all the things like that. Just get rid of it. And secondly is to examine the impact of working abroad on taxation. I'm not a tax expert, so check with your local authorities and find out what is required of you and adhere to it. Make sure you know the rules. Okay, so now that you've everything out of the way, I just want to remind you to do a few things. Have a checklist. Very important. A week or so before you're ready to leave, go through your checklist. You would have had one because going along this journey, you would have made notes of what was required. Pull out your checklist and go through it methodically. Check off everything on the list. That's why it's called a checklist. Make sure you have your passport, cash, Your bank cards are all ready to be used abroad and they're at their max. Make sure you have the job letter from your company or the company abroad that's offering you a job. Make sure you have all certificates. Many countries would like to see originals. Sometimes they accept copies of your original certificates, like your degrees or your educational certificates or professional certificates. Make sure you have those. Very important, know the address of where you're going. Make sure you have a name, a proper address, and a telephone number. Many times during the interrogation process, when you enter a country, they would ask you these questions and they expect to be able to verify them by making a phone call. Make sure you have that. And again, once you've decided to take your pet, make sure you have all the right papers for the pet. A proper certified cage for traveling abroad, and good luck. Remember, keep safe, stay active, enjoy your life. See you.